Hello and welcome to The Wrap, WRAL's politics podcast. I am Will Doran, a state government reporter here, and I am here with my colleague Brian Murphy. It has been an incredibly busy week in state politics, from all of the protests at UNC to a federal appeals court striking down the state health plan's ban on gender-affirming care for state workers and their families, to President Biden here not once but twice. He was in Wilmington for a rally and then in Charlotte because of the terrible shooting there that took the lives of 4 law enforcement officers. And then we had Kelly Daughtry dropping out of a key primary runoff race. We've got rumors flying everywhere in political circles about this wild weekend out in Kentucky that some lawmakers and some lobbyists are rumored to have had. And then it was just incredibly busy at the state legislature, too. So, Brian, we've got a lot to get through. Where do you want to start?
Well, I thought it was amazing how quickly the legislature had gotten down to business. I mean, sometimes there's kind of sleepy starts to sessions. Not this time. Maybe that July 4th get out date is legitimate. I would think the UNC protest is a great place to start. Obviously, less of a tie to politics, but I thought the fact that Lee Roberts, the interim chancellor at UNC, seemed to make a huge impression on Republican lawmakers who really, at the end of the day, are probably his boss. And Phil Berger, Destin Hall, many came out and said they support him for the permanent job. I think he's probably got it sewn up with the way that he's handled some of those protests over there in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, I mean, Lee Roberts was put in this position because the Republican legislature likes him. So he didn't really need to win over fans of the legislature. I mean, he was, budget director for Pat McCrory when he was governor, big ties to GOP politics. It's pretty clear why he was named the interim chancellor at UNC in the first place. But you're right. These protests and his response really kind of sealed the deal. I think it wasn't just Republicans who liked his response. You saw protesters take down the American flag, raise up a Palestinian flag. Roberts walks out with this kind of phalanx of police escorting him, puts back up the American flag, and then gives a speech about how, as long as I'm chancellor, the American flag will always be flying. And yeah, we heard both Speaker Moore and I think Senate Leader Phil Berger quote that speech that he gave and just say that they loved it, they wanted to see it, and, they want the Board of Governors or the Board of Trustees to make him, the permanent chancellor. I don't think that is possible because there's already a contract in place for this outside firm to be conducting a search. So, that's still going to go on and people will get paid, but I'm sure in the end he will be named the permanent chancellor if he wants the job.
Yeah, and yes, I assume he will want the job, but who knows? Those protests, I think, are going to have some long. It will be interesting to see if those protests and how long they last, and if this goes on through the summer, certainly if the war continues in the Middle East, how that does play in politics and in the elections that we have coming up. I mean, there's already been talk about protests at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, which gives a lot of echoes to 1968 when the convention was in Chicago and there were anti-war protests outside and probably sunk the Democrats' chance to win that election in favor of a law and order president or law and order Republican candidate in Richard Nixon. I mean, history may not repeat itself, but it certainly is echoing here. And we're seeing it even at the local level. In the State House, Tim Moore already has an anti-Semitism bill, loaded up and ready to go.
Yeah. And, that was not necessarily in response to these protests, but, obviously it's helped, draw some more attention to that bill. And, we can get a little bit more into the details of that later. It's an interesting bill. I mean, it's got a lot of opposition, even though, you think on its face, okay, anti-Semitism, of course, that's bad. There's a lot of groups who think it goes too far. It's way too aggressive in the kind of conduct that it would outlaw. And so it's an interesting one to watch. And it's probably going to be moving soon. So maybe next week's edition of The Wrap, you'll be hearing more about that, or in a week or two. But you're right. I mean, the legislature did get off to a really fast start, which is surprising given how hungover some of the members had to have been after they returned from this trip on their Bourbon Trail tour that was paid for by Greater Carolina, which is you can call it a social welfare group or a dark money group. Either of those descriptors is accurate. But it set this group of a couple of dozen folks out there to do some bourbon tastings in Kentucky. And social media was on fire with the rumors about all the vomiting and just general bad behavior of the group. Now, I should say the group has since hired Jonathan Felts, who people know as a frequent Republican spokesman on things, who says that those concerns are all overblown, completely exaggerated. They were on perfect behavior. And while some people might have vomited, it was just because the bus they were on was uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a funny story, and we could talk about that aspect, and certainly Felts, lends that kind of comedic take to it. But I think the larger takeaway from it, or at least one of the larger takeaways, I don't pretend to know all the takeaways, but one to me is the lack of anyone answering questions about it. Felts put together this question and answer, this sort of fictitious questions, so that he then got to answer his own made up questions about it. But we still have a lot of questions, and it's less about the behavior, but more to me, and more about like who is getting access to lawmakers for a weekend in which, of course, they're consuming alcohol. They're gone for at least 3 days, at least according to the invitation. Lobbyists, we know this, right, are paying for access to prominent lawmakers. We don't know which lobbyists, we don't know which lawmakers, we don't know what they were doing. And so to me, obviously the bourbon aspect and the vomiting and the rude behavior at the bourbon distillery it makes headlines and generates a lot of attention. But I mean, the larger issue is just how the government functions and how people get access to those in power, and then why you see certain legislation pass and not pass. And so while I may sympathize with some who are like, hey, this happens on the left and the right, and it does, the fact that we don't even know necessarily who was there, who paid to be there, what they were talking about, what they were discussing, that's the part that I think stands out.
Exactly. And, we should note that this group is no stranger to this sort of thing. I mean, our former colleague Travis Fain wrote about this a couple years ago. The same group, Greater Carolina, sponsored an event at a college football game where you could pay, I think it was $10,000 to go sit in a skybox with a handful of powerful Republican state lawmakers. And, so yeah, I mean, it's selling access. And we should note, I mean, that's technically legal, or at least not enforced. But it's just kind of the way things work.
Yeah, and so I mean, yeah. Anyhow, we've probably talked too much about it, given the real stuff that they are passing already in the legislature.
Yes, it's been fast. But first, I want to say with the runoffs, they are underway. Early voting is happening in the runoffs. Our colleague Andy Spay had a big breaking news story that Kelly Daughtry is dropping out of her runoff against Brad Knott in the 13th Congressional District. And you can't really drop out of an election at this point. I mean, her name's still going to be on the ballot. People can still go vote for her, but, she's essentially already conceding defeat.
I just have a lot of questions, right? The runoff is like less than 2 weeks away. Why not stick it out? I mean, even if you lose, why not stick it out? I mean, Brad Knott's been endorsed by Donald Trump, got a lot of ads up, but Kelly Daughtry had a lot of ads up too. And Kelly Daughtry won the original elections. I mean, she finished first in the March primary. She didn't get to 30%, and that's why they're having this runoff. But I raised the question of what happens if she wins this one. The turnout is going to be minuscule. People have already voted. As much as we like to think everyone watches WRAL and reads our website, it's possible that people won't know that Kelly Daughtry dropped out when they go to vote, although the people voting in this probably are highly motivated, highly educated on the election voters, because you got to really go out of your way to vote for one race or two races. But I don't know. What happens if she wins?
Yeah, I mean, I guess she could turn it down and let Brad Knott be named anyways, or take it but then immediately resign, and the GOP could. It's weird. I mean, I think the reason why she's getting out is because she has no expectation of winning, because Trump has endorsed Brad Knott, and that is really the only thing that matters right now. I mean, Daughtry, her name is royalty in Johnston County, which is, I think Johnston County is like 40% of the population of this district. I mean, that's a big deal, but that Trump endorsement is a bigger deal.
Yeah, the Trump endorsement obviously sways a lot of voters. Her best chance, obviously, then was to win this outright in the original primary. But it just seems like you're so close to the end. Why not see it through? But everyone has their reasons.
Yep. Well, there are two other races that are statewide in the runoffs that everyone will be able to vote on. That's the auditor and lieutenant governor's race. We actually have a story that should be coming out this Sunday on the lieutenant governor's race. And we'll be doing some coverage of the auditor's race as well. So check those out if you want to get involved. If you do want to vote, your vote will matter. According to Michael Bitzer, friend of the podcast, as of the first week of early voting, a solid 0.002% turnout in this runoff primary. There's about 15,000 people who have cast ballots so far out of 7 million, I think, voters statewide. So, if you have strong opinions about any of these candidates, or even if you don't, go learn about them because your vote carries a lot of weight in these runoffs. Let's take a break right there, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the state legislature and all of everything that they've been getting up to this past week. Stick around. All right, we are back with the wrap. I am Will Doran here with Brian Murphy talking about this week in the state legislature. It was a busy one, Brian. They two major bills advanced, one to force sheriffs to work with ICE and one spending hundreds of millions of dollars, about $500 million on private school tuition vouchers. But then you also had some bills that you wrote about, forcing UNC schools to play each other in college football and basketball that got filed. Those haven't moved yet, but they've been filed. But they're a talker, and then we've got the antisemitism stuff that we mentioned earlier. So, I mean, it was busy. I want to start off with the vouchers just real quick. I mean, this is something that we've been covering for weeks. I think people are probably pretty familiar with this topic at this point. But $500 million. We have a little over a $1 billion budget surplus going into this new budget. So, spending $500 million on vouchers eats up a lot of that. And I think the real competition for that money was always going to be, do we give raises to state employees and teachers? Do we give money for childcare programs? There's around $1 billion worth of federal aid for childcare and daycares that is just evaporating starting in July. And a lot of daycares have said they're going to be forced to close if that doesn't get replaced. And so, we've heard already from Republican leaders that the extra raises for teachers and state workers were unlikely, but they might dip into the surplus for some bonuses, one-time pay if they could.
Well, these are both Republican priorities, both the ICE bill and the voucher bill are things that they have wanted for years and years. On the voucher bill, this is to eliminate what they say is the 58,000 people who applied, but they ran out of money. So we're talking about the upper income levels here. Now, everybody in Tier 1 got funded. Some people in Tier 2 got funded, but this will remove any backlog in Tier 3 and Tier 4. Democrats are going to try to make hay out of this. Say, hey, you're taking money from public schools, giving it to private schools. It's going to create something of a death spiral for public schools as more and more people I apologize, I got something in my throat. As more and more people, maybe affluent parents take their kids out of public schools, and what happens in communities where there are no good private school options. I think these are all interesting debates, but the Republicans have won on this. I mean, this is the debate is sort of over, and it'll be interesting to see what Democrats are able to do moving forward.
Yeah, and just real quick, you mentioned those tiers. Tier 3, it would be for families making over, I think it's around $115,000 a year. And then Tier 4 is families making around $257,000 a year, I believe. So well above the median income, of course. And the way it prioritizes, they use the vouchers and they give them to the lower income families first. And so by eliminating the wait list, you make sure that all families get paid, even the most wealthy ones.
And one of the arguments Democrats make, and I don't know if it's catching on at all, is that if you already send your child to private school, so you're already paying for that out of your pocket, that's something you've decided to do, you will now get a voucher. So it's not even for new students going. It's for students who are already attending private school, and now they're not changing their behavior at all, but they're now getting $4,000 or whatever the number is from the state government.
Yeah, and of course the GOP argument is that, well, we have a constitutional obligation in North Carolina to fund education for students, and this is just a new way of doing that.
I imagine,
as you said, Republicans have already won this argument.
Right.
It's just a matter of how much money gets put to it.
and the governor will veto it, just as he's going to veto this ICE bill, and the Republicans are going to override both of those vetoes, I would imagine. And the ICE bill, I think we talked about it last week on the wrap. The ICE bill is something that the local sheriffs ran against in 2020. And now Republicans are going to sort of overrule that, and it'll be interesting to see the ramifications of that, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, this is a bill that could have been passed last year. The Senate decided to not pass it and wait till this year, and that's because immigration is going to be a huge political topic this year. And so, let's not pretend that, this isn't about politics. And you're right. I mean, there were several Democratic sheriffs in North Carolina who won election in 2018 and 2022 campaigning on we're not going to cooperate with ICE. And that peeved a lot of conservatives who said, well, that shouldn't be an option for you. You should be required to. And so they're passing this bill. One thing I thought was interesting was, it deals with basically someone gets picked up, they get arrested for something, and do you call ICE or not to let them know, hey, we have this person who is, potentially undocumented. It would only target people who have been charged with felonies or the most serious level of misdemeanors, as well as domestic violence crimes. And Republican Senator Danny Britt explicitly said, this is acknowledging that we need undocumented immigrants in North Carolina for the agriculture industry, for the construction industry, and we don't want to deport people who get pulled over on their way to work and get charged with driving without a license because they're here illegally. We don't want to deport them. He said this is not trying to target hardworking immigrants who are here just trying to make a living. This is only about targeting the criminals. So I thought that was an interesting acknowledgement from a pretty high-level Republican senator that we do need undocumented immigrants here.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting argument that look, we don't have time to talk about immigration policy and everything that what Donald Trump has proposed is what would happen if it goes into effect. But I do think at some point we may have the argument, or not the argument, but the conversation may reach that point. We actually do need some immigrants, to keep our economy moving in many ways. But we're certainly not there yet, I don't think.
No, not yet.
But they haven't been doing only important stuff. They've been playing in my sandbox a little bit.
Yeah. So this bill, I think this is the bill that I know my own dad is the most interested in from this week, and I think a lot of our listeners too, forcing UNC System schools to play each other in college football and basketball.
Yeah, so the bill is poorly written currently because while it means to only target UNC and NC State, the threshold they put for high enrollment institutions also captures UNC Charlotte. But the point of the bill is to have 2 points, and I think the first point's been overlooked a little bit, and I think it's probably equally as important. The first is that UNC and NC State would have to play each other either home or away in all those sports: football, men's and women's basketball. Not a problem when they're both members of the ACC. Obviously, they play many times a year, twice a year in those other sports, once a year in football. But if they were to change conferences, this would be one way of the legislature ensuring that they play each other, even if they're in separate conferences. The other part of the bill that's gotten a lot of attention is those two schools, UNC and NC State, would also be obligated to play ECU, Appalachian State, and UNC Charlotte. Not every year, but a lot and often. And they would be forced to play not only in Raleigh or Chapel Hill, but to go to Boone, to go to Charlotte, to go to Greenville. I don't know how much of an impact this bill – well, first of all, I don't know if this bill will pass. I don't know how much of an impact it will have. I mean, if you look at NC State's schedule, they have home-and-home series with all three of those teams coming up in the next 7 years or so.
Yeah, UNC's been playing App State a lot. They have some really good games against App State in football.
There's been some awesome games. And they also have a home-and-home series set up with UNC Charlotte, which is recruiting territory for North Carolina. They do not have games set up against ECU. I think the way that the lawmakers look at this, some fans of UNC and NC State see it as a punishment. Like, we don't want to have to play these teams. It's a no-win for us.
Right.
If we beat Appalachia State, everyone says we should. If we lose, we're on the cover of their record book the next year. But I think state lawmakers, and this I think fits with some of their views, is they view sports as an economic development tool. I think when you look at sports betting, when you look at the Major Events Fund, when you look at some of the other things they've done with sports and the ACC keeping them in the state, they really view sports, and particularly like Jason Sain and a couple others, really view sports as like an economic driver. And if you can drive the economy of Boone or Charlotte or Greenville on a couple of weekends a year for these big games, that to them is something that's worthy of the state government.
Exactly, because you're not only, helping out just the brand of these, sports programs, you're helping the local hotels, the local restaurants, the local gas stations, all of that.
And their argument is if you're going to play some team out of South Carolina, or you're going to play Miami of Ohio or Troy or,
Louisiana Monroe.
Right. Directional school X. Why not play App State and ECU and Charlotte?
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting. Jason Sain said it's more of a messaging bill than anything, but he wants to see the reaction from the schools. I also think some of it's about seeing how far they can push UNC and NC State. Not the only sports bill that came up this week. Marsha Mori, a Democrat, put forth a bill that would ban prop bets on college sports. It's been an issue we've heard from the NCAA president about. Don't think it has much of a chance of getting through, although I was interested. 10 states that have legal sports betting have put in bans on college betting, on college prop bets. And these are the bets on, will Armando Bacot have 20 points or, more or less? Will he have more or less than 10 rebounds? And certainly the players have indicated they hear from people on social media if they don't win these bets for bettors. And then lastly, sports gambling's become such a big thing, $600 million in the first 3 weeks.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah.
$600 million in 3 weeks.
Well, under North Carolina law, you have to pay on taxes on your winnings, but you don't get to deduct your losses. So if you win $1,000, but you lose $5,000, normally that would be a net loss of $4,000. You wouldn't know taxes on that, but that's not how the law is written. You would have to pay taxes on the $1,000 without counting the $5,000. Governor Cooper indicated he doesn't think that's very fair. And so there's been he wants lawmakers to change that. Jason Sain has said he's interested in changing that. It'll be interesting to see if that's something they can get done during the short session.
We'll see. Yeah, I mean, with the Canes making their way through the Stanley Cup playoff, I guess a lot of people's next year's tax bills could ride on.
Well, a lot of people made some money off of NC State, getting to the Final Four as long shots, winning the ACC tournament as long shots. So there might be some people with some surprise tax bills waiting for them next year.
Yeah. All right. Two final bills from the legislature I want to talk about. One we've referenced already, which is the anti-Semitism bill that House Speaker Tim Moore filed. Our colleague Laura Leslie has been looking into this. It has opposition from the American Civil Liberties Union. It has opposition from the group Jews for Justice. And basically what the bill would do is it would take this International Holocaust Group's definition of anti-Semitism and enshrine that in law here in North Carolina, as this is what counts as the criminal act of anti-Semitism. And there's a lot of very obviously anti-Semitic things in that list. But then there is also things like comparing the government of Israel to Nazi Germany is included in the list. Questioning the veracity of the Holocaust is on the list. And so there's a lot of things that people say, well, sounds like, you're just kind of punishing people for their opinions, for their speech, and we don't know, we don't really want to make that a crime, is what we've been hearing from some opponents. So it'll be interesting to watch that if it does move through the legislature, kind of how that breaks down. I know Congress is debating a similar bill right now, and Marjorie Taylor Greene came out against it recently because it said that if you're a Christian who believes that Jews are responsible for killing Jesus, that would count as anti-Semitism. And
Chip Roy, who's another conservative firebrand, was against it for its broadness as well. Just we're not supposed to criminalize speech in America, and so or thought. Right? However abhorrent that thought may be, when you turn that thought into action, of course, that can be criminal. But just thinking things or saying things shouldn't be a crime. And so This is an interesting one because you're right. I think a lot of free speech absolutists on both the left and the right will have some problems with it. And is it too broad, or what's the overall point? And to have this in conjunction with these protests on campus, which I think the protests have been done a bad job with messaging. I'm not sure what they want. They seem pro-Palestinian, but it seems like they really want are for schools to divest from their holdings in the country of Israel or Israeli companies, or they want the war to end. They've been very unclear about what the final aim of their protests is.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely correct. Speaking of on the divestment angle, I think one thing we could see, I don't think it's been filed yet at the legislature. People who are listening can let me know if I'm wrong. But a few years ago, the legislature passed a new law that banned the state pension fund from investing in companies that were boycotting or divesting from Israel. And so could we also see a new law that bans universities from doing the same thing? I would not be surprised if that sort of bill does move forward, even if a very broadly worded anti-Semitism ban does not. Finally, let's talk about public records a little bit. Last year in the state budget, there was something completely unrelated. Actually, there were a lot of things completely unrelated to the budget that got lumped into the budget. But one of them was a new provision on public records here in North Carolina, and kind of enshrining the belief that the legislature is just completely exempt from public records laws, and that each individual lawmaker can make their own decisions on what of theirs should be public or not. It also went a step further, saying that lawmakers can destroy any of their records at any time that they want. They can actually sell or loan their records. On Thursday, Democratic Senator Greg Meyer from Hillsborough suggested, hey, we should get rid of this. And they were passing basically what's called a technical corrections bill, some tweaks to the budget. And he said, while we're tweaking the budget, why don't we just go ahead and undo these changes that let lawmakers sell their records, loan their records, destroy them whenever they want? And that was very quickly shot down. Spoke with Senate Leader Phil Berger afterwards, who said that Meyer's concerns were completely overblown and he doesn't know of anyone selling their records. Meyer told me, well, of course we wouldn't know of anyone selling their records because they don't have to give up any records about it and they can destroy all the evidence. So, obviously it's a debate that, matters a lot to us in the media, and I hope a lot to the general public as well. Just transparency in government. We are going kind of in the opposite direction, away from transparency, but it looks like that trend is set to continue.
It's interesting because I covered Congress, and Congress has also exempted itself from any kind of public records. You can't get Tom Tillis's emails or Senator Budd's emails, or which is interesting because I can get all the emails to the Chancellor of UNC.
Or to the mayor of Raleigh.
Right. People who make decisions that you think would be less important than state government or the federal government. I certainly public records are vital to the job that we do, but also vital to the way the citizens know about what's happening.
Yep. Well, with that final pitch, we'll let y'all go for this week. Thank you for listening to The Wrap. And there's plenty of other ways to get news from WRAL. If you want to sign up for one of our newsletters or alerts, you can go to WRAL.com/newsletters. Check those out and look for us on a future edition of The Wrap here.